Afternoon to all those that have joined. I can see his message. Afternoon, Caroline. Thank you for joining. As you can see, we have the Professor Dave Jones with us today. And I'm just going to quickly go over to Facebook to make sure we're live there as well. And there's no questions. Bear with me. And that's us up and running.
Good afternoon, everyone.
Just checking on my phone that it is appearing. We are live on Facebook.
I couldn't check. Facebook and I don't get on, so I wouldn't be able to check it anyway.
So keep an eye on Facebook for any questions that are coming in. Let's see that there. And hopefully Robert will be able to join us at some point from Brussels.
So perhaps it might be sensible for me to, the last time I did the Q&A session, I spoke at the beginning about the situation with obeticholic acid, and I think it might be sensible to just do a little follow-up on that, because there is a fair amount of disinformation and incorrect information out there. So this I will give you the chapter and verse as it stands today, and this is quite a live area. So the issue here is whether or not obeticholic acid or Ocaliva is available to patients with PBC. So as many people will be aware, it was approved 8 years ago, and it is in widespread clinical use. There are something like 7,000 plus patient years of use. So this is a normal therapy, normal part of what we do. Newcastle, my own centre, has 100 plus patients taking it. So it's a standard therapy. For very arcane reasons to do with how drugs are approved, once we were allowed to use it, because it clearly benefited people's blood tests. The blood tests are the ones that we know are associated with the disease. And so it is indirect evidence the drug works, but it is indirect. But these are the tests that we all look at, you're all following when you go to clinic, and that improvement of those is associated with improvement of the disease. And if those are normal, then that's great because the disease has returned to normal. That has been the model for what we do and always have done. That was what's called conditional approval, and once a drug is approved like that, there's a requirement to produce more evidence to show that the drug works. Okay. Now, the difficulty, as you will have heard from Robert and from other people, is that it is incredibly difficult to do a trial with a dummy tablet, a placebo trial, when the drug is available to people and clearly works in people. Okay, so if you're told you've got high-risk disease and there is a drug available on the NHS in the UK that turns your test back to normal, would you want to go into a trial where you may be given a placebo or a dummy tablet when the outcome is whether or not you die or need a liver transplant? It's as simple as that. No, it's almost unethical, and we as the doctors find it unethical to suggest that. And we are ethically, morally and legally obliged to explain to people all the options that are available to them, where research is one of them, the other options. On that basis, people didn't stay in this confirmatory trial, and it's entirely reasonable they did, and so therefore the evidence could not be provided. But the lack of evidence of benefit is not evidence of lack of benefit. It is just that you can't provide the proof you've been asked to because you just can't. And a sensible way to approach that would be to then look at what other evidence is there, what else do we know based on, as I said, a drug that's been widely used for a long period of time. So what else can we look at to see whether the drug works or not? And the extensive experience we all have of using it and the research done around that all indicates that it's safe and effective. So the issue, however, has been a very dogmatic way for the European Union to take evidence. That the view they took is, we told you to produce this evidence, you can't produce this evidence, so therefore there is no evidence and therefore the drug should be removed, which is fundamentally illogical and is dogma. It's pure dogma. So the reason why you can't produce the evidence they ask for is because it's not deliverable, because you're making an unreasonable request of people. And there is a lot of alternative evidence from multiple sources around the world, but we're not going to look at that because it isn't the evidence we asked for. And if that sounds petty-minded, bureaucratic, dogmatic, choose your word, then it is. It's as simple as that. And so on that basis, because the companies and the clinicians were unable to produce the one piece of evidence they requested, and were not prepared to look at other pieces of evidence or to understand why it was impossible to produce that evidence, essentially it was the regulatory equivalent of sticking your fingers in the ears and going, no, 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 not listening. The drug was recommended for withdrawal. There has then been a howl of outrage internationally, I think it's fair to say. And if I use strong words in this, that's because I feel strongly about it, okay? There has been a howl of outrage from patients and patient groups and from clinicians and experts around the world, all of whom pointing that this is the wrong decision. It's not the right decision, it's a bureaucratic decision, and it is one that disadvantages patients. This was not a decision based on the safety of the drug, although people have chosen to misinterpret this. So it is not. I was in the process. I know what was said. The drug, it's not a safety decision. It is about a bureaucratic decision about what evidence you have and haven't been able to provide and what you'll look at. And so essentially everyone agrees, or almost everyone agrees, that this is the wrong decision. Most recently this week, the European Association Study the Liver, which is the professional body for liver doctors across Europe, they derived the quality of life measures, the guidelines that we use to manage PBC. This is how we do it. They now have come out and said this decision is wrong and it needs to be changed. So where we are at the moment in the EU 27 is that this is a recommendation by the European Medicine Agency and it needs to be ratified by the European Commission. And Robert has appeared as if by magic from the demonstration in Brussels that is going on today to go along with the written letters protesting this and the various different other communications people have sent around this to persuade them to take a step back, to have a look again, because this is the wrong decision. Okay, just very quickly for those people in the United Kingdom, none of this applies to the United Kingdom because of Brexit. We are not still ruled by the by the EMA. And in the UK, the MHRA will take their own decision. And they are going to go back to the very beginning of this, we now understand, and look at all of the evidence properly. So there is no intention or likelihood, I think, that this decision will be mirrored in the UK. And so for anybody in the UK taking obeticholic acid or thinking of starting it, nothing has changed. It is business as usual. America will take its own decision. The FDA will make a decision in September. And they have been much more sensible about all of this. They are interested in what evidence there is of effectiveness. They understand and accept why the trial couldn't be done. And they are willing to look at real world evidence, but will ask us searching questions about the quality of it. Australia, I heard from this morning, Australia have no intention to look at this again, but are watching events around the world. So this is what's going to happen. At the moment, increasingly, the EMA Europe looks like an outlier in the decision process. In essence, no one agrees with them. And what we have to do is to persuade the European Commission that the decision made by the EMA, for all the perfectly good reasons that they took it, was the wrong decision, and that they need to take a step back and look again. And so that's where we're up to. And with that, we'll move to our Brussels correspondent, Robert.
Yeah, I'm just hearing the signal now. No, so apologies for being late. I was actually just involved.
Cold there, mate.
It's perfect. It's not too warm, not too cool. There's not too much or any rain. We have UK patients here. We have Belgian patients here, and it's fantastic. We're here to bring public awareness to this campaign, and to see patients from completely different countries talking to each other, connecting, sharing their shared experience of taking obeticholic acid and the benefits it's brought them personally. It's an incredibly useful thing to say. So apologies for being late, but I was being interviewed by the press with the patients here with us. to highlight what we're trying to do and why.
And
The patients made some great points, which is fantastic to hear.
And fundamentally, the point here is that the decision about obeticholic acid, which is a perfectly safe drug, and it has strengths and it has weaknesses like any drug, the decision about whether to use it should be taken between me as the doctor and you as the patient. That should be my decision with you, with your viewpoint being the paramount one. That is not a decision that should be taken by a Brussels civil servant who has never spoken to a PBC patient in their life. It's as simple as that. And that nobody is saying everybody with PBC should take obeticholic acid. They shouldn't. Nobody's ever said that. But it is to take away the right to have something when there is no reason to take that away based on safety, and based on a process that ignores the effect it's had on you as an individual. Isn't the answer, if we collectively think you'll benefit from the treatment, isn't the answer to try that treatment and see what happens? And at the end of trying that treatment for a month, we, meaning you as a patient and me as a doctor, can make a sensible grown-up decision about whether it's the right thing to do. It's the taking away of that, which is how medicine has always operated. And I do accept that doctors don't talk to patients enough about it, but in our world we do. And I think it's just completely wrong. And as I said, if I sound strong about this, is because I feel very strongly about this.
No, I appreciate that. So, Dave, so 28th of June, there was anger, there was despair, there was despondency, there were a whole lot of emotional reactions to what we thought was a collective bout of insanity, frankly.
Yes.
And since then, there's been multiple patient reactions. We have listened to the patients that have spoken to us, and so there've been, the foundation statement that you and I co-authored. There was the joint PAG statement. There was so much that was going on, and it take me back to the name change.
Yes, I was thinking
impossible couldn't be done, and then for NICE to say the same things in scientific, not NICE, sorry, forgive me, for EASL to say the same things in scientific terms that we've been saying in lay terms. I think the unity and the collectiveness within the community is immensely powerful.
Yes, and I think in a sense what we're saying is, in the nicest possible way and with all due deference and understanding how difficult it is, not everyone in life always gets everything right, and on this occasion they've got it wrong, and they really do need to listen to the collective voice of different people who are vested in all of this, and kind of have the humility to say, okay, we might have got this wrong. That's all we're asking for at the moment, is don't take it off the market, take a step back and have a look at this again, because this is the wrong decision. I believe it is, for all manner of reasons. You believe it is, for all manner of reasons. The entire PBC community thinks it is, for all manner of reasons. So isn't it sensible, rather than just to double and treble down on a decision you made, to say, maybe we got this one wrong? And we're not having a go at them. We're just saying, big people are prepared to accept that they don't get everything right, and they look again. If this kind of gets the feeling it's wrong, let's look again.
And I think when you look at the president's set, so for example, PFIC, which I can't remember what the P stands for, but it's progressive familial intrahepatic cholestasis. So again, it's a pediatric disease, but it was a condition where the regulators accepted synthetic controls or retrospective controls. And I think there's a real opportunity for the EMA to look at this and go, actually, there's a chance to do better. So particularly if we're going to look at rare disease, let's look at using comparators, but let's look at real world evidence as we go. Let's look at retrospective history and the actual natural progression of the disease, and bring all of those data together in a meaningful way, and actually design it in such a way that we get the best of all worlds.
So I just, before I came onto this call, immediately before, I was on a conversation with Genomics England. So the genetic structure, as people will be aware, many rare diseases are genetic, PBC isn't. So this is not a PBC conversation, but this is a rare disease conversation. And this was about this exact question, which is, we've got a whole revolution of therapies, but these are essentially individualized. It is a designer therapy around the nature of the disease in an individual person. So what we're going to do is to look to correct an abnormality that's specific to that individual. Okay, and we can look at the ways in which you do it and look at those are safe, and we can look whether it works in individual. But you can't do a trial as you were asked to do in PBC for the simple reason that this therapy is only relevant to one individual person. So what do you do in that situation? Well, in that situation, you either say, well, in that case, can't compute. We can't do this because we can't do a trial of 200 people. Or you can say, we can't do a trial of 200 people, so let's find different ways of evidence. Nobody's saying that we shouldn't absolutely look at the safety of treatments. Of course we should. And that we shouldn't look at whether they work or not. Of course they are. And the reason for this is that, of course, if we advocated for a treatment that fundamentally doesn't work, if the EMA was right and I'm wrong, all the experts are wrong, then actually that disadvantages you as patients, because we will be giving you a therapy which doesn't work rather than another therapy which might work. So it's not in anyone's interest to support a therapy that doesn't work. But we need to be realistic that sometimes you're going to have different ways of showing that things work. And the problem for PBC is that, unfortunately, it's kind of right on the cusp of what might be provable using a traditional trial, but it's really, really difficult. If PBC was 10 times rarer, people wouldn't actually have this problem because they would say, we just can't do it. So unfortunately, one of the things I have said, and Robert, you would be proud of me in these various conversations, is about all of this is in one of the conversations I had with the EMA, and I'm going to say this, they said to me, if people aren't going into these trials, why am I not making them go into trials? So Robert, calm down, take a beta blocker, right? Calm down. Why are we not making people do it? Okay. So to which the answer is, have you not read your regulations? Have you not read the Treaty of Helsinki? Have you not read good clinical practice? Have you not seen the moral, ethical, and legal obligations I'm under? I'm obliged when talking about a trial. I mean, and this isn't why I do it. I do it because it's the right thing to do, but I am legally required to do it, to explain to you what all the options are and the pros and cons of all of those options. And if at the end of all of that, you want to go into a trial where there's a 50% chance of you getting a placebo, then that is entirely your right to do it. But I'm required to explain to you what the issue is. So for the regulators to say I should make you go into a trial is, shall we say, problematic for a number of reasons. And the point I've been increasingly making is that what sort of madness and crassness is it for you to say things like that without having the courtesy to talk to the patients on whom this has a direct impact? So don't you think, before you're saying, well, you should do the trials by making people to do that, should you not talk to the people who this directly impacts and ask them what they think of that? And what I've warned people is that I feel, I think Robert will give you chapter and verse on this, that there is a head of stream going behind essentially a patient strike, which is to say, we're not going to do placebo arms in these trials just because you demand it. That is an assumption about what we will do that you haven't had the courtesy to talk to us about, and it's an assumption too far. And actually that's hit home with people.
No, absolutely. And again, taking the conversation we've had with patients after this, when we get some spare time, we'll be taking on the new medications in their 7-year placebo trial as well. But I'm going to go back to patients, if I may. I'm going to change my camera. I just want to share with you some of the messages that the patients have brought with us today. So
good. I like that one. Yeah, absolutely. Couldn't agree more. Couldn't agree more. Couldn't agree more.
And there's just a wee plug at the end. So we're all here. But it's great to see. And as I say, we've got patients from different countries coming together and speaking with one voice. So it's great. So again, it's really nice that a nice array of banners, actually, and some really, really important messages that are in amongst there. And I think one of the questions that comes up is that so the drug failed. It's like, well, no, actually, the trial failed.
Yes.
So I love the idea that PBC patients didn't get a fair trial. So absolutely.
So the example I always use of this is that whether a trial works or not depends on what the drug is, who you give it to, and how you decide whether it's worked or not. Okay. And the absurd example, so I teach students on this. I mean, they seem to understand this more than the EMA does, but there you go. So if you were to do a trial of a heart attack treatment, so a treatment for people who had a heart attack, okay, and you measured what height people were as an outcome measure, okay? Now, what height you are is a perfectly reasonable and valid biological measure. It's just not relevant at all to somebody having a heart attack. And you would say, well, that's insane. You're measuring something that's got nothing whatsoever to do with what you're actually doing, but it's still a biological measurement that is valid. So a trial won't work if you measure height when you're trying to treat a heart attack. It will only work if you're measuring survival after a heart attack. So measuring the wrong thing, it means a trial won't work. And Robert's absolutely right. The trial didn't work. It isn't that the drug didn't work. The drug very clearly works. And for those of you who think that the EMA don't get that, their guidance says, on the one hand, the drug doesn't work, and on the other hand, they accept that patients will be harmed by the drug being stopped. So make your mind up, guys. Either it works or it doesn't work. If you really believe this drug doesn't work, if you believe that your mother was on it and therefore they should stop it because you think it doesn't work, why do you say people will be harmed by it being stopped? If it doesn't work, you can't possibly be harmed by it being stopped. So I think what we need to do is to persuade them to look again, to a bit of humility, to say on this front we may have been wrong, and this, of course, as Robert alluded to, this is not about obeticholic acid. It's just obeticholic acid, in the sort of musical chairs kids game. Obeticholic acid was the drug that had to be standing up when the music stopped. So unfortunately, the other drugs will be caught up in this, and as Robert has alluded to, the definition of insanity is to keep doing the same thing and expecting a different outcome. And so these other drugs are also going to do 7-year placebo-controlled trials to an outcome. And I have to say that one of them has now pulled their trial from the UK because we've told them we're not doing it, we can't do it, and we shouldn't do it. So this isn't just about obeticholic acid. This is about all of the drugs in the future. We have to have a reasonable and sensible and acceptable to patients, involving patients in deciding what's acceptable, of course. We need to have a process that allows us to sensibly evaluate these new drugs. Otherwise, we're just going to chuck them in the bin and we'll go back to urso and bezafibrate, which we had 20 years ago.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so on the topic of repeating yourself and hoping for different outcomes, we're going to go into the short fire round. No. So we've got lots of people watching on Facebook, which is fantastic.
Yeah.
So if you want to ask your question, we'd be delighted to do so. They can be OCA related, they can be PBC related, and all of these kinds of things. So
Robert, before we do that, can I just check?
Please.
Have you had your chips and mayonnaise yet?
Well, not yet. Not yet.
And are you anywhere near the little boy having a wee in the fountain?
I was a little. No. Not yet, but we'll get there. We'll get there.
I think you need to.
Right. So here we go. So first sensible question of the day. So it says, I'm currently on urso, bezafibrate, and going to start OCA soon.
Yeah.
I've been told I'm an aggressive case. So I just want to clarify, you're not an aggressive case. I'm an aggressive case, which is an entirely different thing. However, you may have a slightly more aggressive form of PBC, which is a different thing. I just wanted to provide that clarification. I've had 2 pregnancies since diagnosis, and this has sent my numbers up.
Yeah.
So I'm going to ask you about kind of pregnancy numbers, because I know that changes both when you're pregnant and then when you give birth. Will this third-line therapy treatment help, or am I likely to continue to progress fast?
Okay. So some very good aspects to that. So we'll take them in turn. So the first is pregnancy and PBC. So pregnancy is, we don't see a huge number of pregnancies in PBC patients. The reason for that is obviously the typical age of many PBC patients. So the peak age of onset is kind of 40 onwards, and so people have often finished their families by that point. So there's no sinister reason why we don't see many pregnancies. It's just in a sense, the age spread of patients. Where people want to get pregnant, what do we say to people? The answer is PBC shouldn't enter into your thinking at all. Okay, and that it's really important with a disease like PBC to not make it rule your life. Make it something that you think about, in terms of what's happening, but you don't let it rule your life. So the PBC is there to be managed with your clinicians, as you're going along with that. There are lots of gaps of information, and this is, I think, an area where the foundation can come up with some wonderful data. We don't get a sense that there's particularly a problem getting pregnant. So we don't get a sense of that. With autoimmune hepatitis, there is a little bit, but I don't think we see that. I certainly isn't something that people talk to us about. So when people are pregnant, are there any implications of having PBC on the baby? None whatsoever. At all. We don't see any problems with the baby's birth weight, delivery, etc. So the baby side of it is fine. What about the mum side of it? Well, there are two things to think of. So the first is, if you happen to be one of the small number of people who have cirrhosis with PBC, then you do need to be aware of it. So cirrhosis can create complications. So what this means is, you get to about 6 months, you need to have an endoscopy. It's nothing more than that, but they just need to make sure you're not developing varices. So in the small number of people who are cirrhotic, then, and that's typically people who developed at a very young age, then you do need to be aware of it. That's the only thing to be aware of. It's to do with the pressure inside the abdomen with pregnancy. In terms of the effect of the pregnancy on PBC, you can see this flare up of the tests typically towards the end of pregnancy and immediately afterwards. And that's to do with the very high levels of female hormones, so estrogen and progesterone, which really ramp up towards the end of pregnancy, and you sometimes see the itch getting a little bit worse. And then that typically settles down post pregnancy. So we would tend not to chase those numbers. So we would not go adjusting the therapy directly around delivery, because it will normally settle its way down. Now, there's an analogy here with cholestasis of pregnancy, which is something we definitely see, where you get some PBC-like features in people towards the end of pregnancy. And that, again, is these female sex hormone effect. And sometimes that can continue for 6 to 9 months after the baby's born. So you think it will get better immediately, but it can sometimes take a little while. So just be aware of that. So 3 months post delivery, we wouldn't go chasing the numbers. If it's not settling at 3 months, then we would do, because you can always wean things out. So, we always schedule to see people relatively early after the baby. The nurses in clinic want to see the baby anyway, so we're required to do that. They like to see the babies, but we also then just take a pragmatic view. We would always continue URSO throughout pregnancy, so we would not stop it. When people are trying to get pregnant, it's perfectly safe. It's used for cholestasis of pregnancy. We would recommend that's the simplest thing to do. So if you have had a couple of pregnancies, it sort of messed things up a little bit and it's not settled down, and your URSO and bezafibrate, and on the combination of URSO and bezafibrate, the tests still aren't right. And particularly if you're at the age to be having babies, then you're young and you need to be aware of that. So I would definitely go for triple therapy, definitely. What we wouldn't do is to swap bezafibrate for obeticholic acid. That was what we used to do a little while ago. And I think now the evidence is very clear-cut that obeticholic acid together with bezafibrate and URSO is probably the perfect combination for people with high-risk disease. So we would add in the obeticholic acid to the bezafibrate and URSO. We would almost never stop one of the drugs if we're adding the other one, because it's the combination. I think in many ways this is one of the arguments that we hear, going back to the obeticholic acid stuff, is that why do you need to use obeticholic acid when there's bezafibrate? Well, the answer is bezafibrate is nowhere near as effective as obeticholic acid in our experience, and they work in different ways. And it's now beyond clear that it is the combination of those two that is optimal. So actually, it's not bezafibrate or obeticholic acid. It's which one to try first, and then which one to add in if you want to add additional control. So it's 1, 2, 3. It's not 1, 2A versus 2B. It's as simple as that.
Yeah.
And so we can't then give people triple therapy if the drug that is the key part of it is then removed. So in terms of somebody starting, even if obeticholic acid is withdrawn in the UK, it will still be available to people who are already taking it. And it may well be available to people who want to start it. So if it's a discussion you're having now, personally, I would start it because it will make it far easier to continue with it. And there is no reason. I cannot emphasize enough the concern about it was not to do with the safety of the drug. And 80 to 75% of people normalize all their tests on that combination of 3 drugs. That's the future.
Okay, perfect. So a couple of questions, if I may. So we've got a comment here, which is, it took 2 years and a lot of red tape to put me on OCA. It's brought my levels down and could have helped earlier. And the question is, what right do they have to play with how my life and condition progresses? Which I think is a really, really fine point. Now, you and I have completely different expertise and skill sets, neither of which are legal. But I am going to ask you a question because, you know, when you look at the guidelines, and the guidelines are pretty clear in what the steps are to be taken. So is there anything as a clinician that you can say about the guidelines and about what pathways are open to patients who maybe haven't been put on OCA and maybe have progressed and maybe, you know, eventually years down the line, OCA's made a difference, but they're already progressed. So what can you offer as a clinician? What's in your experience and what do you know?
I mean, so the first thing to say is that it shouldn't take lots of red tape. It shouldn't. And so, you know, it's worth asking why that happened. So obeticholic acid, certainly, you know, in our clinical service, between me saying, I think this might be a good idea, and you getting a prescription sent to your home is never more than 4 weeks. And so, you know, it shouldn't have created lots of red tape. It might have done in the early days. It shouldn't do now. If we have to go to what's called compassionate use, so getting access to it after it's been withdrawn, that will add in red tape. That's one of the reasons we want to do it. You know, the path of least resistance for doctors. So maybe if it's just too difficult to do it, people won't do it. So nobody should be put off from embarking on these therapies because of red tape. You know, it should be a normal part of practice. At the end of the day, obeticholic, I mean, we talk about guidelines until we're blue in the face. In fact, obeticholic acid is recommended by NICE. And so doctors, it's not voluntary. Doctors have to do it because it's NICE recommended for the treatment and you are entitled to NICE recommended therapy. It's as simple as that in the UK. Okay. What if your doctor isn't doing it? I think this is difficult. And it's to do with how you approach that. In my experience, the first thing to do is to have an honest discussion with them. Is don't get all heavy and legal. Say, you know, I've spoken to the foundation. I've read around this. Here are the guidelines. Here are the criteria. You know, I feel I meet those criteria. Can I start obeticholic acid? Okay. You know, the internet's out there. It's a great liberating force. The guidelines are there. NICE guidance is there. NICE guidance do not recommend bezafibrate. It is not a licensed drug for PBC. It is that people who are also non-responsive, under-responsive are entitled to obeticholic acid. Okay, so I think there should be, at the very least, a discussion that you're part of, and you know, you can ask for that, and a lot of people feel comfortable with that. But to be honest, you know, if you were, you know, getting messed around by a shop, you would be quite happy to say, hang on a second, you know, I'm going to do this. I'd like you to treat me differently. We should do more of that. So if your doctor then doesn't do that, your doctor doesn't do that, what do you do? Now, I think at that point, you should go to your, and essentially your doctor is a closed door for this, okay? Then I think at that point, you should go and talk to your GP and ask for a second opinion, okay? So we see a fair number of people from around the country who've asked for a second opinion, and you are entitled to that. You need to explain why, but you've just given a good explanation why, is that standard therapy recommended guideline, NICE approved, has been for whatever reason denied to me. I would like to have a second opinion. And then you need to, if you're going to go for a second opinion, do not go in the same hospital, okay? Because they will close ranks behind each other. You need to go to a different centre. So at that point, you need to go to the nearest kind of PBC centre, and the foundation can advise on the right centres for that. This is not necessarily big hospitals, you know, big fancy hospitals, because I'm afraid rubbish management in PBC is equal opportunity, as Robert knows, you know. So it is one of the PBC centres, you know, the Newcastles, the Cambridges, the Royal Frees, the Kings, the Birminghams, you know, the Portsmouths, you know, and there are really good, and also go to the right place within those centres. I, you know, met somebody, you know, my own centre who, you know, had been sent to Newcastle because they had really difficult to manage itch, but had ended up in a general clinic with somebody who knew no more about itch than the person who sent them. So they'd almost got to the right place, but just not quite. So go to one of the centres and they would all be happy to do this. Remember that getting a view on this is just, in the first instance, a paper. You know, the GP can write to us with your numbers and the story, and we can give a, you know, a view of what we think. So, and that should usually work, and we see that. I mean, it's in, you know, people are perfectly entitled to that, and people, you know, advocate it. I think if people decline to treat you properly and then decline to get a second opinion, they need to be aware that they're skating on thin ice now, because they're not doing the right thing, and then they're following that by not doing the right thing again in a slightly different way. I think ultimately you need to make sure you get the right thing done. I think it's very clear now that anybody who's a non-responder to URSO should at least be actively considering second-line therapy. There are reasons why you might not want to take it, and there are reasons why you might want to take it, but that should be your decision fundamentally, and a sensible discussion about it. And an increasing number of people are going to lawyers about that. And, you know, Robert and I are aware of this. You know, I look at a number of cases. I don't think I've ever seen one which isn't a slam dunk example of bad practice. And, you know, sometimes that's the way to get these people to take this seriously. There is, so I'm always happy to look at the stories behind it all. And I'm not a lawyer, but I've done a number of legal cases around PBC, so I kind of know the thing. And one of the companies one of the solicitors' practices that have supported a foundation member to get an appropriate legal settlement for their poor care are very, in my experience, very good and get this, and they've had extensive dialogue around that, and they will be very happy to give people free advice on their story about all of this if they would like that. And I've said that I would happily advise on that, you know, pro bono. They will do this pro bono. But if people do then want to go down the legal avenue, they've got a lot of experience. And in my experience with them, they have been very supportive and very helpful and very good with people. Okay. So I think if people want to do that, we can give you the details, and they would, the very nice solicitor who I've dealt happily chat to people about all of this and what they think. So that's out there. It's much better for everybody that it doesn't come to that, okay? But 100%. If it's not going to come to anything else, then it should come to that. Do remember, though, that once you're taking a legal case, you're still not getting the drug, right? So you actually need to get, so my advice to anybody who's thinking of taking legal action is that for tomorrow. For today, it's getting the right treatment. So get yourself seen by somebody, get onto the right treatment, and then that you've then got more time to look at the other aspects of it. But fundamentally, there is a thing called MDU, you know, MDU guidance. So we're all members, I think, called Medical Defence Union, which lawyers, you know, which are doctors have to be part of a medical protection organisation, and they give guidance to doctors, and they tell the stories of where people have done it wrong. And to get these stories into that is the most important thing. So here are some simple mistakes that doctors make, and basically, if you get sued, they're not even going to contest it because it's so obviously bad, because you've ignored the basic things. And we need to get some of these stories into that. So it just says to people, this is now, it's not optional, it's not nice to have, it's not something you could think about if you feel like it. It's standard practice, it's nice guidance. If you're not doing it, and it all goes wrong, then somebody somewhere will come along and wave a big stick at you. But it's best not to do that. And if they're not going to treat you properly, you don't want to see them anyway. So go to somebody who will treat you properly, and the foundation can advise on all of that. But start with asking them nicely and showing them that you're informed about it, and that this is, the NICE guidance is available online. You can put NICE guidance PBC, you'll find it there. Take a copy in and say, NICE guidance says this, can I have this drug? And then it's really difficult for them to say. Okay.
No, absolutely. No, that's really, really helpful. So thank you very much. So I actually gave a consultant a bit of a surprise when I turned up with a patient last week.
Yeah.
So you can imagine. So I've got a question for you. So again, this one is slightly steeped in ignorance. So bear with me and I'll try and answer the question as best I can. So when you look at trial data, you will have improvement beyond the threshold, and then you have normalization.
Yeah.
And when you look at URSO, the fibrates, the new PPAR agonists, the FXR agonists, and the different mechanisms, and then you have triple therapy.
Yeah.
What can you tell us in and around the data that we know about the normalization rates under those different, so single regimen, double regimen, triple regimen, that kind of thing?
Yeah. Okay. So if you take everybody, take all comers, and that includes people with mild disease and more severe disease, and put them on URSO, around about 30% will normalize their tests, okay? But most of those will be people whose tests weren't that abnormal to start with. So obviously it's far easier to normalize if you're only just abnormal. So the headline rate for URSO is actually very impressive for normalization, but the caveat is that that is much less impressive when you look at people with more severe disease. If you take people whose numbers were not at the level of URSO response when they start the treatment. So clearly, if your blood tests were within the URSO response range before you started URSO, you're going to automatically be an URSO responder, aren't you? Because if you're below the line when you start, you're going to probably be below the line when you finish. So if you exclude those people and only look at people who are non-responders in terms of their abnormality, you know what I mean? That they need to go from above the line to below the line, then it's much less effective. It's about 5% only will normalize with URSO. That's the problem in a nutshell. If you take those people and then you give them one of the second line drugs, then the headline figures, and we'll come back to what that means, are that bezafibrate normalizes in about 25% of people. OCA normalizes about 10% of people. Elafibranor normalizes around 15% of people, and seladelpar normalizes about 25% of people. So at face value, that suggests that the best drug is bezafibrate, followed by seladelpar, etc. Two caveats to that. First is the trials included very different people. So the trial included very different people. So the bezafibrate trial included people who are much closer to the line at the beginning, so far less distance to go. If you were doing, let's be topical, if you're doing the 100 meters in the Olympics, if you started at 90 meters, you've got a good chance of winning, haven't you? But people starting at 0 meters would say, oh, in a second, they're almost there. And that's the way to look at it. If you started everybody at the same point, bezafibrate is the least effective drug. So you can't compare one trial with another because the trials started at a different point. Think of the 100 meters, okay? Now, when people talk about these drugs, everyone has a vested interest. And the bezafibrate people will say, but we're not a company, we're not a vested interest, but they're building their careers on bezafibrate. So people are not necessarily straight about the limitations of the data, but bezafibrate has the highest normalization rate because it included the people who were closest to normal to start with. The other trials were reasonably similar, and so those percentages are all reasonably accurate and comparable, okay? And what that tells you is these drugs normalize some people, but they only normalize a minority of people. So they're good, but they're not the answer, okay? If, however, you combine bezafibrate with the obeticholic acid, that comment before about the lady with the pregnancies, then you are up to 70%, not 10%, 15%, 20%, you're up to 70%. Okay. And now we're talking about, and Robert will know from his broader hepatology, role about Hep C and the history of that, where you started with low percentages of cure, 5%, 10%, it went to 20%, everyone got very excited because it's doubled. Well, it's still only 20%. And then it became over 50%, and all of a sudden you were on the home straight. And then it was 60, 70, 80, 90, 95%. And then it was all about how you got the drugs to people. So we are on the home straight for PBC if you combine urso with an FXR agonist with a PPAR. At the moment, it's the combination of urso, OCA plus bezafibrate. I have no doubt that if you combine OCA, which is the only FXR agonist we can use, plus urso, plus seladelpar or elafibranor, you will be at 90%. And I think that's the future, full stop. So don't look at the differences between the individual drugs when you correct for them are pretty marginal, okay? And none of these is the definitive answer compared to one of the others. The definitive answer is multiple ones of these, and that will be the answer, which is, of course, exactly what happened with Hep C. So it was the combinations of drugs that ultimately had the effect. So we've been here before. So anybody, without question, if you're the archetypal 40-year-old person with bad PBC who's worried about the future, triple therapy, full stop.
Perfect. Thank you. I appreciate that. I'm glad you corrected me, because I had a number of 80% for the triple therapy. So it was good to know it's 70. I
mean, again, it's about what, I mean, it's all complicated because you talk about normal, but normality of what test. So one of the things, this is something you and I need to talk about, but I'm pressing the companies, is they all use different versions of normal. So some use bilirubin and alkaline phosphatase, some use bilirubin, alkaline phosphatase plus ALT. And we need to, and of course, companies, bless them, will tend to use the criteria that fit their drug best. So what we actually need is to have a stand so that we all talk about the same thing. Okay.
I've actually been thinking about this, and I'm a bit disappointed that you and I haven't got together and made a Hadrian's Wall response criteria, because I think the world needs another response criteria.
The Hadrian criteria. No, you're right. So,
right.
And you think it's an arcane thing, because you see, for those of you who have no idea what we're talking about, I live in the part of England that is north of Hadrian's Wall. So many people use north of Hadrian's Wall as a euphemism for being Scottish, okay? But I'm one of that group of English north of Hadrian's Wall people. So it's a source of contention.
The world just wants to be Scottish. That's a different thing.
It's a different thing entirely. So the point about it is that we, the academics, have managed to confuse the hell out of everybody over the years with all of this by using different criteria. And I just slightly worry that we are light on normal, which anybody can understand. And all of a sudden, we're going to have different versions of normal, and let's not do that. So we should say by normal, we mean alkaline phosphatase, bilirubin, and ALT. And that's normal is what I think we should do. And we should push for that.
Thank you. We're in Brussels, and we know that politicians never really enjoy a follow-up question, but we're not like that, so we're going to have one. So going back to the pregnancy question, we have a question that says, if estrogen in pregnancy can cause PBC to be less stable, does increased estrogen from being overweight have a similar effect too?
So I'm going to be a politician and say, well, that's a very good question, but an even better question is, that's what they would tend to. Actually, I thought politicians say, would you like a second-hand camper van? That's what they tend to say in some parts of the world. Really good question. Okay, as always, they're all really good questions. So estrogen, the liver, in a way, doesn't recognize where estrogen comes from. Okay, so estrogen comes from a variety of sources. It comes from the ovaries, okay, in women. It comes from the testes in men, interestingly. We all think that men have testosterone, women have estrogen. In fact, both have both, and it's the balance that's important. It comes from the placenta when people are pregnant. It comes from a packet where people are on the pill or taking HRT. And it comes from fatty tissue where it's released by fat, okay? And theoretically, any source of estrogen, if somebody is predisposed to estrogen-driven cholestasis, can make it worse. So we do see a small group of women, for example, who get change in their itch during the menstrual cycle. So immediately before a period, their itch will get worse. So that's something we do see. We see some people approaching the menopause will get fluctuations around it. We see that. We see people going on to HRT, sometimes, not much. People starting the pill, sometimes not much. Obesity is difficult to know. There isn't an association between obesity and worse or better PBC. There is no clinical association. However, it's a steady state. So, body fat tends not to fluctuate. So in an individual, it's possible that that is contributing to it. We know that exercise and weight loss are good for quality of life and symptoms in PBC. There's almost no information about their impact on the disease itself. So it's a really good question. I don't think there's a big connection, but nobody's ever really looked at it. But remember, the risks of, say, HRT are not as big as some people think they are. I think mea culpa, we have probably overestimated the risks and therefore underused HRT for symptom control in people. And I can convincingly, I can tell you absolutely that I have never seen a PBC patient where I convincingly thought that HRT was involved in the development of the disease, or if they already had the disease, where HRT was involved in changing or making the disease worse. There is a theoretical aspect to it, but it is just that, theoretical.
Perfect, thank you, that's really helpful. We've also had a question coming on Facebook in and around statins. So we've gone from a really a novel question to one that I think is really important we cover as and when it comes up regularly. So can you just, this will be the last question for today, because we're looking for another interview actually, which we'll go and do. But the question is in and around PBC, cholesterol, statins, and any other treatments.
Yes, okay. So why does anybody need statins? Statins reduce cardiac risk in people at risk of cardiac disease, okay? So cardiac disease, stroke, heart disease, peripheral vascular disease, okay? And statins reduce cardiac risk by two reasons. One is they have a natural cardiac risk reducing effect. They have a beneficial effect on the heart. And the other is an effect on cholesterol, which itself can lead to deposition in the arteries and cause arterial heart disease. And it is important, it's not just the cholesterol effect for statins. So if you've got a strong family history of heart disease and you've got diabetes, then actually you should be taking a statin irrespective of your cholesterol, because it will reduce your cardiac risk. And in the same way, risk can be overstated. People take strong views on all of this. And you'll hear strong statin advocates who say, oh, side effects of statins never occur. It's all over. It's all anti-statin people bigging it up. And then some people say you get problems. The answer is you get problems in some people, not commonly, but you do see them. So the answer, as always, is somewhere in the middle. Now, PBC, the reason why this is a topical issue for PBC patients is not because they have an increased risk of heart disease, they don't, not because there is a particular problem, there isn't. It's just that cholesterol values tend to be elevated in PBC, full stop. So they're elevated because of the disease process, because bile acids are at the heart of PBC. Bile acids are made out of cholesterol, so the whole pathway for cholesterol to bile acids is disturbed, so you tend to have a high cholesterol. However, it is the beneficial cholesterol, it's the good cholesterol, if you like, high density lipoprotein, not the bad cholesterol. So that's chapter and verse. And because it's the good cholesterol, that's why you don't see an increase in heart disease, okay? The problem with all of these things is that is true across the whole population of PBC patients. If you take 1,000 PBC patients, that's true across all of them. There will be individual people who do have a risk of increased cholesterol because PBC doesn't protect you in the same way as it doesn't cause problems. So at an individual level, you need to understand what your risk is. You can't take the total cholesterol value because that will always be high. What you need to do is to do what we call the differential cholesterol, which is to measure the components of cholesterol. Is it the good cholesterol that's up? That's the PBC pattern. Or is it the bad cholesterol that's up? That's the non-PBC pattern, but having PBC doesn't protect you from the bad pattern. So you don't put people on statins just because they've got high cholesterol with PBC. You measure their split cholesterol to work out, is it the high risk or the low risk one? And if you've got high risk PBC, you should go on a statin because, nobody wants to have a heart attack. No, that's not going to help anybody. And so therefore, that's what you should do. Fibrates, our old friends fibrates, will reduce cholesterol. They don't have the cardiac protective effect that statins do. So if you've got high cardiac risk, you should take a statin. Taking a fibrate, because it kind of covers cholesterol and kind of covers PBC, is a false economy. And we would always advocate, if you need better PBC treatment and better cholesterol treatment, you should have OCA plus a statin, not a fibrate. Hot off the press, I've just seen the data for elafibranor for cholesterol, and it's a bit like fibrates. It's a bit kind of meh. It does improve your cholesterol, but it's not game changing. So the guidance would always be, if you need a statin because you really need a statin, not just based on your cholesterol being high, have a statin, and in our experience it's perfectly safe. And if you need better PBC treatment with that, combination of statin and OCA is fine, and fibrates are not really a sensible compromise.
Okay, thank you. So just as you think I'm bad, you should wait till you get kicked by Jacqueline. So Jacqueline's here to close off. But what I'm going to say to you is that I'm now going to talk about you, not to you, Dave. So anyone who's watching this, you know, we work as a team. Dave has been the chair of the Medical Advisory Board now for a couple of years. He puts in an enormous amount of work. He gets a huge range of annoying emails from me saying, we need this, we need that. Can you do this? I know I've asked you for 3 other things. I need this 4th thing, and I need this 4th thing before the 2nd thing, and all of this kind of stuff. And Dave produces at an amazing rate. And, you know, we're here, we're making a noise, we're making sure that more people are aware of PBC and the issues that we face. But we would not be here without Dave's tireless work, the extra stuff he puts in, the support he provides for the documents, the position statements, everything we put out always goes through the Medical Advisory Board to make sure that it's accurate and all of those kind of things. And so us doing this today is a consequence of all the hard work that's gone on behind the scenes. And well, Dave, you know, personally, I know what you put in, and I'm grateful.
Well, thank you for the very kind words. You didn't need to say that. This is really important. Can I also reciprocate and say, you know, everyone here knows what the PBC Foundation does. I mean, I'm very clear. It's unique, actually, in my experience, in terms of the scope and effectiveness of what it does. So that goes without saying. I'll just say very specifically, I think the lobbying around OCA has been phenomenally effective. And I'm going to go out on a limb here, and I think we're winning, right? I think we're winning. And I think we're winning because the case has been made in such an effective way. And I think the way you've gone about this and the way all of you have gone about this is a really, really effective, good example of it, which is to really make the case in an effective way, but not making it histrionic and not making it emotional. It's making it evidenced. And I think if this doesn't get overturned, it won't be for want of trying. It won't be because it wasn't done in the most effective way. Fundamentally, we're dealing with bureaucrats and they're unpredictable. But I think it has been a phenomenally powerful example, and everyone sees that. And I think, you know, I think we've just got to tell them they're wrong. Not nastily, not no. Just to say, we're not perfect. All of us have a process sometimes in life, but I've run large organizations. I was in the Department of Health for a number of years, and we actually had a system. Most of the decisions we made about grant allocations, things like that, were right. But we were prepared to say we were wrong. And actually, but we wanted people to say why, not just say we don't like your decision, but to say why we think you're wrong and why we should look again and what's the reason for it. And so it's the reasoned argument. I think that's being done very effectively. If they don't listen, then I think it's very difficult. And I suggest that everybody moves to the UK, because I think in the UK, we will continue to have OCA because we are almost certainly winning the argument.
Brilliant. Okay. On that note, thank you so much again for today and all your support, Dave. And if you're watching this and if you have further questions, email them and we'll do the best we can next time.
I think doing it as a live stream outside broadcast, I think that's brilliant. That's a first for the Q&A sessions.
So, all right, brilliant. You take care, mate. Thank you. All right, Jacqueline, over to you.
Like
thank you so much.
Heathcliff in the wind, though, with your hair. I'll leave it at that. Okay.
There you go. On that note. All right.
Goodbye, everyone. Keep up the good work.
Thanks, mate.
Thank you so much for your time, Professor